And there was given to me a reed like unto a rod. And he said to me, measure the temple, measure the altar, and those that worship in. Guys, this is a series and playlist on measuring the temple. And in this one, we're going to talk about the mile. In the Greek, it's called the million, where we get the word million in English, a million steps, okay? And we're going to measure the temple because the temple is measured by a race. If you haven't watched the previous video, please watch What is a Stadion? Running the race, okay? Well, another race where he said to run, in Zechariah chapter 2, Christ says, when someone asks you to go a mile, go with him too. This is where we get the expression in English, go the extra mile. It's not actually the extra mile. It's 1 mile, the length, and it's a second mile, the breadth. So what he's actually giving us measurements for the temple. 1 measurement, second measurement, 2 measurements give us a perfect square, okay? So the temple precinct is measurable by this mile. Christ said if someone asks you for one to go with them, like a courier is a runner, and they bring a epistle, they bring a writing from the king, okay? And so if the distance is 1 mile, okay, Christ said go a second. Well, those are 2 measurements, guys, the length and the breadth, a perfect square, okay? That's what he's alluding to with this word mile. It's a courier, okay? It's a race. So part of the temple is measurable by this mile. Now, this mile is close, but not precise to the modern mile in England and the United States. We have to make a difference, okay? Just like we have a cubit, okay? We have a sacred cubit. It's like a sacred mile, okay? So the present mile that we have has 5,280 feet. Well, the sacred mile has 5,250 feet. Okay, see that? 5250, just like the sacred cubit is 2520. So, let us measure the temple, okay, and use our measuring reed. The angel had a measuring reed, and it was a certain number of reeds, 500 reeds, and 500 cubits to measure the temple. Now, let's investigate in the Bible what is a mile. We find the word mile only in one place in the scriptures, and it's right here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 41. And what it says is, this is the Beatitudes that Jesus Christ is giving to the people, telling about blessed is he, and he's expounding on the kingdom of heaven. And whosoever shall compel you to go a mile, go with him too. Now, what we want to do is we want to look at the words in Greek that the writer is using so that we can get an understanding of what this means, to compel you. Okay? So in Greek, the word compel you comes from actually Persia, and it means to be a courier, to press into public service. So as we read here, to employ a courier, a dispatch, a mounted messenger, to press into public service, to compel to go. In Persia, mounted couriers were kept in regular intervals throughout Persia for carrying royal dispatches. So these intervals were measured in something called miles, okay? Or a distance. This would be a runner, and he would take a piece of royal decree from the king or what have you and dispatch by running. Running what? A mile. So then we say,
whosoever shall ask you to go as a dispatcher or a runner a mile, and let's look at the word mile here. Okay. It's in the Strong's Concordance, and you can see it's this word million of Latin origin, 1,000 paces, a mile. So the modern word we get for mile comes from this word in Greek of Latin origin, million. Okay? And what it says here is a mile among the Romans was a distance of 1,000 paces or 8 stadia. Okay, we're going to look at the stadia. Hopefully you've watched the other videos on running the race and what a stadia is. But here they're saying it's about 1.5 kilometers, somewhat less than our mile. So what we're doing is we're investigating what is this mile? What is this distance? It's, of course, very important for us as we get into the intricacies of the temple. Of course, we are the temple, and we are stones in the temple, but there are instructions to build it, right? There's instructions in New Jerusalem. So let's look at those, and let's look at what we can see with these measurements. How do these measurements contribute to building something? When we go to Zechariah chapter 2, verse 1, I lifted up my eyes, and behold, look, a man with a measuring line. So here's our measuring line in his hand, and he says, where are you going? He's saying to measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth thereof, to see what is the length thereof. So, what do we have? We have two measurements. We have what is the length, and another, what is the breadth, right? Remember, Christ said, whoever asks you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. So that's the same thing. It's 2 miles, or 2 measurements, the breadth and the length. You see that? And what do we have? The breadth, the length, and behold, the angel that went forth. Remember, we have an angel here. These are angels. So these are holy measurements. Another angel went to meet him and said, run. Run. Now what do we have? We have running, right? We saw the courier. The courier was to dispatch. He was to run a mile. And whoever asked you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now, you can see what it's saying here. It's saying Jerusalem. And you have 2 measurements to measure Jerusalem, the breadth and the length. What that means is it's a perfect square. In a perfect square, you only need 2 measurements because the other 2 measurements are equal. Now, Jerusalem has never been measured with 2 measurements. It is built on a mountain with hills and valleys, and it's built around, it's not a perfect square. So this is not anything that's ever happened before, okay? But what do we have? We have this run, okay? So we have 2 lengths, the breadth, the length, and run. Why is he saying run? Well, it's a courier. He's running this race. And he has remember, it's an angel. This is holy measurements. He has a measuring line in his hand. Now that we can see that Jerusalem is measured by 2 measurements as a perfect square, we can also see Jerusalem is inhabited as towns without walls, a multitude of men and cattle. Okay? And thus says the Lord, I will be a wall of fire round about, and will be the glory in the midst. Okay? So this is a wall of fire. All right? So what is this? Well, what we need to do is look at Revelation, and let's look again at the measuring of the temple that John does. Okay, here in Revelation chapter 11, verse 1, and there was given to me a reed. That's what we showed you in the beginning, a reed like unto a rod. And the angel, again we have angels, these are holy measurements, saying, rise, measure the temple of God, the altar, and those that worship therein. Okay, so measure the temple. So that's what we're doing, guys. We're measuring the temple. Well, what temple is this? Or what is going on here? Well, there's a measuring reed. You can see the word reed here in Greek is actually the word kalamos. Okay? And it's a staff or a reed for measuring. It's a measuring reed. It's a measuring rod. Okay? And again, the angel is instructing John to measure. Now, John is also instructed by an angel to measure New Jerusalem. And the wall of the city, this is Revelation 21:14, and the wall of the city and the 12 foundations and then the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city, the gates, and the wall. So again, golden, this is the angel, this is golden. These are holy measurements, sacred measurements. And the city lies foursquare, or is a perfect square. And the length is as large as its breadth. Okay, so there's, again, two measurements. Length, breadth, two measurements only. Perfect square. Just like we saw in Zechariah, and 2 miles, right? The length of the breadth of the square, and he measured the city with a reed, 12,000 furlongs. We see in English, but again, in Greek, this is a stadion. Okay, see that? So 12,000 stadion. And you can see it's a race course. And we have the other video running the race. So the angel is measuring New Jerusalem. He's measuring with a golden reed. Okay? And he's measuring a perfect square. 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height are equal. He measured the wall. 144 cubits. Okay, so what's a cubit? A sacred cubit is 25.2 inches or 2.1 feet. So we have other videos on the sacred cubit, but you can see New Jerusalem is measured by a stadion. New Jerusalem is measured by a cubit. However, John is instructed to measure the temple, right? But it says here in verse 22, I saw no temple, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. So what is the temple that John is being instructed to measure? He's being instructed to measure this by angels. He's been given a reed. Okay? We can see these angels. Well, what is this? Now, these reeds and these measurements we do find in Zechariah 41. In the visions of God, he brought me to the land of Israel. He set me on a very high mountain, which is in the frame of a city to the south. And he brought me there, and a man whose appearance was like appearance of brass. Okay, so this is an angel, right? Again, angel, holy measurements, with a line of flax in his hand. So again, a measuring line, just like we saw in Zechariah chapter 2. Appears like flax in the hand, and a measuring reed. Okay, so now we have this measuring reed. And he stood at the gate. And then he instructs him, behold, a wall on the outside of the house round about, and a man's hand had a measuring reed of 6 cubits by the cubit and a handbreadth. So these are sacred cubits. And he measured the breadth of the building 1 reed and the height 1 reed. So there are 6 cubits in 1 reed. So there's 2.1 feet in a cubit, and there's 6 cubits. So it's 12.6 feet. And let's just illustrate that for you by showing you a measuring reed. All right, here is a measuring reed, which you can see. It's 12.6 feet in length. And we're doing this just to illustrate and show you that this is what a measuring reed looks like. And the angel had a golden measuring reed in Revelation, and the angel has a measuring reed in Ezekiel. And we're just trying to show and illustrate and try and fit on the camera 12.6 feet. And this is our measuring reed to measure the temple. And this is the staff that John had in Revelation 11. So what we have is clearly we have a measuring reed that is given by an angel, just like the measuring reed of Revelation. Okay, John is given that measuring reed to measure the temple. As well, Ezekiel sees, this measuring reed going about, showing us the measurements of a temple. And this temple's never been built. Okay, so now let's look at this as it relates to a mile. Okay, now it doesn't actually use the word mile in Hebrew, but what we can do is find it in the measurements that Ezekiel gives us. Now, in Ezekiel chapter 42, verse 16, he brought me forth to the gate, his prospect towards the east, and measured it round about. And he measured the east side with a measuring reed, 500 reeds. With the measuring reed round about, he measured the north, 500 reeds. He measured reed round about. He measured the south, 500 reeds. Okay, and the west, 500 reeds with the measuring reed. So now we're getting some measurements about the gates around the city. And he measured it on four sides in a wall round about, 500 and 500 broad, and making a separation between the sanctuary and the profane place. Okay? So what we have is a perfect square of 500 reeds. So let's just do some quick math and show you exactly what these measurements are. Okay, let's remember our sacred cubit is 2.1 feet. And if you don't know about where we came up with this figure, watch the other video on what is a cubit. So there's this is 1 cubit, and there are 6 cubits in a reed. So we take the 2.1 times 6, and we come up with a measuring reed of 12.6 feet. Okay? Now, we just saw that the gates were 500 reeds. So we take our 12.6 feet, and we multiply that by 500. All right, now what do we have? We have 6,300 feet. Okay, that is the measurement of the perfect square of the gates. Okay? And now what we have is something else that's amazing. And I hope you understand this and can pick up on it. So remember, we have 6,300 feet in this perfect square that's around the temple. Now the temple complex is 500 cubits. So 500 cubits, let's multiply that times 25.2 inches. We'll just use inches in this case. And actually, let's divide that to get feet. Divide that by 12. Okay, this is more consistent with what we're doing. So the temple complex of buildings has 1,050 feet in each length. Okay? So that is there's various gates and everything, but it's 1,050 feet. All right? Now, let's just kind of give you a sense of scale of what it is we're looking at here. Now, here we're drawing out the 500 reeds, okay, in the perfect square. And then inside of that is an area we had 1,500 feet. Okay, this is the temple complex here. And then the 500 reeds is 6,300 feet. Okay? So that's this length here, and this is the temple complex. So there is a direct relationship here because this is 500 cubits, this is 500 reeds. Okay, if we take our 6,300 feet that are in 500 reeds and we subtract the 1,550 feet that's in a 500 cubits, we get 5,250 feet. Okay? Now this, what you're looking at right here, is a sacred mile. The typical mile has 5,280 feet, but that's 30 feet too long. Now these are sacred measurements by angels. So the mile essentially is a subtraction of 500 reeds from 500 cubits. If we subtract those, we get 5,250 feet that go into our mile. Now we can also use this to measure New Jerusalem. And New Jerusalem, it says, if we believe that this is our measurement for a stadion, or this distance would relate to New Jerusalem, we have 6,300, and we divide that by 5,250, it comes out to 1.2 miles. Okay? Now if this translates to New Jerusalem is 12,000 stadion. Okay, so if we take this and we multiply it by 12,000, we come up with 14,400. Isn't that an interesting number? Well, this is miles. So if this is correct, this would mean New Jerusalem is bigger than the earth. The earth would fit inside it. So, I'm just sharing this stuff with you because I think it's interesting, and then we'll also, seek confirmation on it. But it gives us this idea that things are much bigger. The race is longer. New Jerusalem is bigger, right? It's not just a box landing on the earth. It could be that the earth fits inside it, or that there's a whole new heaven and a whole new earth. But we do have a sacred measurement that we now know for a mile. The current mile we have is 5,280 feet. Okay, but that is not correct. Our sacred mile is 5,250 feet. Okay.
So thanks for watching the new mile, Measure the Temple. We do have a playlist called Number, Weigh, Divide on measuring the temple. Okay. I'll put a link in the description field for that playlist, but thanks for watching. And as we always say, watch and pray that you be counted worthy to escape what is coming. God bless you.